we've witnessed a series of strikes. Nigerians have been grappling with the hardship. There seems to be a lot of mathematics going on here. How do we determine the minimum wage?
Workers have one illusion that all they are interested is in the nominal wages they are getting. But it then provides a backlog on which the wage structure is constructed. Poor countries or developing countries have comparative advantage in labor-intensive production process.
Can you help us understand what the minimum wage is, what the living wage is, and what the cost of living is? How do you define those? Welcome to the maiden edition of the Economic Jigsaw. My name is Evelyn Dan Epelle, Communications Fellow here at the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa. The Economic Jigsaw podcast is brought to you by CC in partnership with the Nigerian Economic Society. And here we offer fresh alternative policy options that help shape our understanding of prevailing issues hindering the country's growth and development. The Nigerian economy is experiencing severe macroeconomic turbulence due to public policy failures and a mix of global and regional economic downturns. Today we'll be discussing the cost of living and how that staggers greatly from the minimum wage in Nigeria. This issue has prevailed, recently resulting in a resumed strike by the Nigerian Labour Congress. And to help us do justice in understanding the issues is a distinguished figure in the field of economics and academia. From 1987 to 1990, he served as the head of department in the Department of Economics at the Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. And he was the sub-dean academics for the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at ABU Zaria from 1983 to 1984. Professor Mike Kwanashie was the president of the Nigerian Economic Society, and during the Olusegun Obasanjo administration, he served as special advisor on economics and social matters to the president in the office of the vice president. He was also the vice chancellor of Veritas University and is currently a professor of economics at the university. It's such an honor to have you here at the maiden edition, Professor Kwanashie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Can you tell us immediately what you're feeling about today's economic situation in Nigeria is? How are you feeling?
Well, not very happy. I think as you rightly pointed out, the economy is going through a turbulent period. We're in a way transiting from a phase of neoliberal economic policies to a slightly different phase. And the adjustment process has not been easy for the country. And one of the highlights of events that has, sort of showcased that is the current labor crisis.
Right.
The labor unions insisting that government must revisit the issue of the minimum wage. That certainly has put some pressure on economic managers who must recognize that the minimum wage has been very, very low in the face of cost of living.
Right.
I mean, I think most Nigerians recognize that. I don't think we can really debate that. But the question is, what are the policy options? What are the responses? How will government respond? And the crisis we have right now is an inability of government to bring labor around to appreciate its own view on the minimum wage. And labor on the other side that has for years, almost more than a decade, survived on one minimum wage. Despite the turbulence of the economy, the ups and downs, the minimum wage has remained the same, while the cost of living has skyrocketed.
Right.
Multiple hundreds, So the dilemma now for labor is how can they survive in a situation where you have this massive increase in the cost of living, very little support for the common man from government, and we now have to resolve that crisis. There's a need for everybody to come together and to appreciate the gravity of the current economic situation as it pertains to labor. Other aspects of the economy are performing differently, but when you talk of labor, I think labor has had a very, very rough time,
So like you've rightly said, we've witnessed a series of strikes. Recently, the Nigerian Labour Congress was pushing for increase in the minimum wage. The impact of fiscal and monetary policy measures coupled with international disruptions, even like the Russia-Ukraine war, has also led in global surge of prices. And Nigeria, of course, is not an exception. We see this happening in other countries in the region and even in the developed world, if we may. And for months now, Nigerians have been sort of grappling with the hardships that have even led to an alarming rise in our poverty rates. We now have an estimated 133 million Nigerians that have been impacted by this. And, the Nigerian Labour Congress believes that by increasing the minimum wage, this would sort of safeguard Nigerians from falling deeper and deeper into poverty and to cushion the impact of rising cost of living. But the first question I have for you is this the right approach, increasing the minimum wage? And maybe for our audience that may not be familiar with the concept, can you tell us what the minimum wage is and even what the cost of living is?
Yeah, I think that distinction is very, very important. First of all, let's address the issues as to whether just increasing the minimum wage is a solution. From labor perspective, it's the different groups in society approach the same problem with different mindset and even different understanding of the dynamics of the economy. So right now you see that government being responsible for the macroeconomic health of the economy is more bothered about what a change in the wage rate will have on the overall economic dynamics. Government is more worried about that. They are worried about the wage, inflationary spirals. They are worried about, prices getting out of hand and markets collapsing. But that is not really the focus of labor. Just as you rightly pointed out, and rightly so too, labor is worried about the cost of living. Labor is worried that its members are sinking more and deeper and deeper into poverty. And that is just their
primary concern.
That's their primary concern. So from their perspective, yes, you must increase the minimum wage rate. But maybe at this point, let's even begin to make to say yes, it's right. The question is, are they actually pursuing is that the right variable? Is just increasing the minimum wage rate, is that enough to solve the basic issue of poverty in Nigeria? And the answer is not too clear. It's not a yes/no answer. So labor should appreciate that. If you increase wages and that you have a spiraling expectation of inflation, you are going to find a rapid depreciation of even the new wage wage and minimum wage you've just earned. And that is why you see labor insisting that they're just not going to take 100% increase in wages because they're already anticipating the wage inflation spiral. And they're saying, no, give us 400%, give us 500%. Let's not come back in the next 6 months saying that what you've given us has been eaten up by inflation. Actually, if care is not taken, we'll actually be moving backwards, not moving forward. But the question is that actually the strategic way of looking at it? I think labor and government must sit down. It's done as it's done in other countries, advanced countries. They have to sit down and do the calculation.
Right.
And government appreciate the implications of their policies on the standard of living and the cost of living, and labor appreciating that a spiral caused by wage increases will actually, at the end of the day, impoverish more people than they actually Unless, of course, we insist that workers have one illusion that all they are interested is in the nominal wages they are getting, not the real wages. Because if you have inflation, your real wage is actually coming down. You could have 400% increase. But if inflation goes double that, at the end of the day, you're going to have less, in real terms, what you started up with. So there's a different understanding among both groups, labor and government, and they must have a common vision of the destiny of this country. There must be a common vision. And unless you have that, this whole crisis is just going to be perpetuated. Government must develop the confidence, or people must develop confidence and trust in their government. And they must sit down and understand that dynamics and try to sort out what, I wouldn't want to use the word optimum wage is, but actually a way that will stabilize the economy, a way that will stimulate growth, a way that will make sure that real incomes are
and make sense on both sides of the
yes, of the divide.
Just to, bring this down to the level of, our non-technical audience, can you help us understand what the minimum wage is, what the living wage is, and what the cost of living is? How do you define those?
Okay, I think that's a very interesting and very important distinction to me. The minimum wage is the wage, it's a reference wage. I mean, most people don't, it's simply a reference wage. It's a wage below which, well, the law is a legal minimum. And it's a minimum that industry, public institutions, actually the law tells you the size of an establishment, the number of workers that, is bound by the law. That's what you can't pay anybody in your organization less than that. But it then provides a backlog on which the wage structure is constructed. It just simply says, let's take the public service. It says that the lowest paid worker in that service must be X amount. And who is the lowest worker? It's probably the cleaner,
right?
The whatever. It gives you that reference, okay? And then you construct the wage structure on it. And of course, as you know, it goes up to the
top.
You can change that structure, though. You can recalibrate it to reduce the difference between the least paid worker and the highest paid worker. That's a different conversation altogether. So the impact of that restructuring of the wage profile itself is very, very important on the way the economy reacts to the wage. I think it's important to make that decision, because if you ask that question, what is minimum? It's just a reference wage. It's a legal reference.
Got it.
And this legal reference does not mean that everybody must stick by it. Now, I want to make that distinction very clearly. If you go to industry, and again, in all market economics, that is the case, no two industries will have the same wage structure, because the wage structure determines the profitability of the enterprise. I mean, if you recalibrate to the extent that you go out of business because you're paying a huge cost, labor cost,
right?
That particular industry.
By labor costs, you mean like the operational costs?
The labor cost.
Okay.
And most people, again, now that most people have now argued that, well, in modern industries, labor cost has reduced. It's not what it was 2 or 3 decades ago, because you now have technology.
Right.
Labor is no longer that big chunk of
the cost.
Of the cost. So you can do whatever you like with the wages, and it still will not impact on the major industries. But if you look at developing economies, our industries are still, labor dependent.
Yeah.
And let's just pause a minute and look at the macro dynamics. Poor countries or developing countries have comparative advantage in labor-intensive production process. In the high-tech industries, we are still struggling to become globally competitive.
Right.
And when you talk of foreign direct investment, at least in the manufacturing and production sectors, our comparative advantage, the relocation of industries from the West to the developing country, is based on what? It's based on the fact that we have low wages. So those industries come in here, they are leaving the developed countries, they are coming to, what are they coming to? They are coming to take advantage of the low cost. If that cost continues to spiral,
right,
if you want to make it competitive in that from the labor point of view, with, let's say wages in even sister developing countries, there's a tendency for this investment to move to the least labor cost industry. I'm not justifying that, but I'm saying that's the dynamics of globalization.
I was going to ask you that.
No, I'm not. We don't want to keep our wages low simply because we want to attract, but that is the dynamics of the system, the way it works. And well, we're anticipating, I'm sure I'm anticipating some question you certainly will add down the line. It's okay, how do we respond to that? How do we make our country not be a dumping ground for labor-intensive, cheap labor type of activities? And it is for us developing our technology, adapting technology, and making our labor more productive. I mean, we have to, both sides will have to agree with that. So let me still come back to the distinction you're making.
Yes.
The
minimum living wage.
The living wage is the wage that defines an income that enables an average family to live a decent life. And there is the problem with that definition. I've just used the word what? Decent life.
So what's decent?
What is decent?
It's subjective.
Yes, but it's objective, but it's also collectively defined. The state has a covenant with the people. And the state, ab initio, says we are going to create, not poverty. No state ever gets into a covenant telling its people that it will create a system in which they are poor. No. That covenant says, see, we are going to make life bearable for you.
Right.
Yes. As economists, people have tried to, the poverty study people have tried to develop indices, the child mortality must be this, there must be care, there must be education, every child, those indices have been developed, and then you just cost them and take what that standard is and ensure that. So when we say living wage, we're not talking of minimum wage. Living wage is normally higher than the minimum wage. The minimum wage is just a benchmark. It's a starting point for you to create, the wage architecture on which labor is recruited. Now, I'm making that distinction because again, when we come to policy, we have to come back to it. The living wage of an individual will be lower and begin to approach the minimum wage when government provides social services. In countries where you have free health, for example, government has taken away that living cost. When you have free education, government has taken what? That out. When you have free transportation, government has taken that out. So, as they remove that, then the minimum cost of living comes down and keeps on approaching
the minimum
wage, which is the legal minimum, right? So what we actually, in the conversation like this, what we want to actually look at is the cost of living,
right?
Which is just the itemization of these points I've made: housing, transport, health, education.
So that constitutes the cost of living.
The cost of living.
So the cost of living, we can say that that's what it would cost to survive, at a basic level.
Yes, at a reasonable level.
Yeah.
Again,
and the basics: shelter,
education,
food, clothing.
Yes. Yes. So you calculate all that and say, okay, this is what it will cost. Labor will tell you that, of course, they are mindful of that. That's how they arrive at their own minimum wage. That's what they will say. They will say, well, this minimum wage we are proposing is not just a benchmark for us. We don't care about your benchmark. We are saying that benchmark must be a wage that conforms to all these criteria. But you see, the problem with that is you really can't calculate the value of most of these items. You can put figures on them, yes. So it's easier for negotiations to say minimum wage. And when we give you the money, you can do whatever it is you want to do with it. If you don't want health, that's your business. If you don't want education,
Prof.
Okay.
There seems to be a lot of mathematics going on here. How do we determine the minimum wage? What metrics or what indicators? How do we calculate the minimum wage? I know that in countries like the United States and the United Kingdom, the minimum wage is revised yearly. Is that something we do here in Nigeria as well? And, what is the going practice even? How do we arrive at that figure?
Look, even for the developed countries, it varies from country to country.
Yes.
In UK, they have these annual indicators telling you what the minimum is. In a place like the United States, it's not annual. They've also maintained a relatively stable minimum. It increases, yes, but not as stagnant as it is in this country. But that's because the Americans allow the market to operate. Again, that's a reference point. But then once you go to the market determines what they pay. And it's not on an aggregate level. It's on each market, the demand and supply for labor in that market determines, and even as state, it varies from state to state. Some states are paying something close to the federal minimum. Some state minimum are a little bit higher than federal minimum. So again, because you look at it as a reference price for labor, and they then allow the individual markets, to then work out based on the nature of the industry or the nature of the state, the nature of the region, what the labor market clearing price will be. So when you then come to bring everybody together, and then you are talking of one wage, it has to be a reference wage. It has to be a basis on which each market, whatever production line you are looking at can then. But then that means I don't want to complicate this conversation. In economics, we say, what is the rate of returns for labor? How do we share the proceeds
right.
Among capital, among labor, among entrepreneurship, the profit? Is the productivity, right? It's at the margin what labor contributes to the process, technically. So what labor contributes to the production process in one industry is not the same as what labor contributes to the final production in another industry. What the law says is that we don't care what the rate of returns is of labor, there's a minimum that you can't go below. That might mean that some industries cannot operate in Nigeria because of that minimum. Because the rate of returns of factors, in this case, rate of returns of labor in the production process, might be so low that if you insist on a higher rate of returns on labor in that industry will have to close. Okay. Again, we're looking at aggregates here. But when we look at that, we should also be mindful that the way market economy works, it is not a communist or socialist thing where you pay, you determine the price you are selling, and no. The various industries, sell in an open market. And not only that, they compete with imports that are low priced because of the technology and the scale of production, outside the country. So the industries in this country are faced with, major challenges, of poor production, weak infrastructure, weak support from the system, and they have to compete. And remember that in the liberalization and globalization process, we say you can't stop imports. We are signing into all these agreements that says that our industrialists must compete globally. We must learn to be competitive.
Right.
And I'm not saying that the burden of that should be on labor. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that labor must be made to be productive enough in the process to contribute higher values to the production process.
Nigeria is a country with huge potentials and good fundamentals. But in recent times, Nigeria has been grappling with several economic challenges. There is rising inflation, there's the forex crisis, and there is recently the debate on the new minimum wage. My name is Dr. Kwanashie. I'm the Executive Director of Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa. CC is an economic think tank that uses evidence-based research to inform economic policies in Nigeria and Africa broadly. We're happy to be partnering with the Nigerian Economic Society, which has a pool of expert economists, and that fits nicely into our work in CC in advancing evidence-based economic policymaking.
My name is Professor Adeola Adelikeju. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Ibadan and the current president of the Nigerian Economic Society, the NES. The NES is the oldest professional society in the social sciences in Nigeria. It was started in 1957 in London. And basically it provides an umbrella for all trade economists and allied professionals. We are very proud to be collaborating with the Center for the Studies of Economics of Africa. We just signed an MOU that allows both of us to work together. And one area of this collaboration is the production of a podcast. The podcast that is called the Economic Jigsaw will provide an opportunity for economists, Nigerian economists, to actually be able to share their perspectives on various economic policies, put in place by the government. It would also provide, in my view, an opportunity for young academics and students to also listen to the views and perspectives of experts in this area.
I'm happy to introduce the Economic Jigsaw, which is a podcast that will be done periodically and will focus on several economic issues, whereby we'll bring expert opinions to weigh in on all these issues that Nigeria is facing.
This podcast is going to give an opportunity for government to actually get a feedback also from trade economists, and also get some recommendations on how we can make these reforms succeed and how we can make our economy to be better.
Please follow us to subscribe to the different social media handles that will be showing, or presenting this economic jigsaw. Thank you very much.
I'm not saying that the burden of that should be on labor. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that labor must be made to be productive enough in the process to contribute higher values to the production process. If you come to the public sector, we don't even know what the productivity of the public sector is. So we determine what we can recalibrate the wage structure in the public sector by looking at the ability to pay. And that's another argument. Can government pay? State governments are already complaining. We can't pay what labor is asking. We can't. Why? Because if you look at our budget, I'm not saying that state governors are correct. We have to look at the data, because labor in those states are saying no, but you are paying your legislators this much. You are buying this flamboyant thing. You are consuming. You can't do that and turn around and tell me that you can't pay, the minimum wage. But again, commissions should sit down and look at the data and see where both sides can meet. If the ultimate objective is the welfare of the people on the one hand, but also the sustainability of the economy on the other hand, because it is the sustainable economy that defines the welfare of the people. I mean, you have to simultaneously, try to solve that equation.
Yeah, we have a structural problem in our hands, whereas there is a high informal sector in the country, and increasing the minimum wage, just like you have said, is a step in the right direction. However, it's also inflationary in a way, because the informal sector. Let's talk about the tweets that I read the other day on X. I don't know that you're familiar with the platform, but on social media, I read a post from someone who said if the government goes ahead to increase the minimum wage, he would increase the price of a crate of egg to 10,000 naira. The question I have, going by that mindset, which I think is really the going mindset in the informal sector. You see, when the removal of the fuel subsidy happened, even right at where the president was at Eagle Square, people were already queuing up at the filling station, and different fuel stations were already increasing the pump price of fuel just by the mere announcement that, the fuel subsidy was removed. Going by that understanding, what would you say is the feasibility of implementing some kind of inflation indexed salary policy? Do you think that would be?
Yes, actually, again, we are getting to the solution. My advice for labor is just to say, you know what, we are going to stop this wrangling over and over wages. Indexed wages in Nigeria. Just tie them to the inflation rate so that we have an indexed wage structure. In other words, we are going to renegotiate on real wages, not nominal wages. What you should be looking at, all of us should be looking at, is what's happening to real wages. And of course, government will not. There are many times in government, inflation is used as a tool to stabilize the economy deliberately.
How so?
Oh, each time we have quantitative easing, pumping money into the system, all we do, go to the central bank and print more money and pay wages. The more you increase money supply, what happens? You're indirectly doing what? Inflating the economy. You don't have the money. It's either you borrow or you go and print. And in the past decade, governments have always said, no, we don't print money because, of course, it's a dirty thing to say to the government you're printing money because you don't have money, you just go to your printing press and the Idi Amin style. You can't do that. Your credibility is not. But when the central bank tells us that they are doing quantitative easing, I really wonder what does that mean? We print money. We bring in new money into the system. And basically what that is simply inflation. So inflation can be a tool of development, yes. It recalibrates those prices, real wages down, and enables you some space because you're actually taxing people indirectly. And people will say, well, people in third world countries don't pay tax. Nigeria is said to be has the lowest tax, rates in Africa. And yes, so if you don't want to honestly pay your tax, we'll tax you in an indirect way. So one is not saying that inflation itself is so bad. No, there are also policy. Right. Others have argued though, because I listened to some of the conversation, and people say, listen, if you don't increase wages, or if you increase wages, you increase consumption.
Right.
Right? And then you grow the economy. And there's a problem with that argument. It's a valid argument though. We can't debate that. But there's a problem with that argument. Our production structure is extremely weak. If you increase these wages, I bet you, we're not even talking of the upper class, even the middle class will spend almost 80% of it doing what? Importing. Oh, yes.
What do you mean? How so?
Oh, because the commodities that the market they will rush to spend that money are markets that are supplied through imports, not domestic production. If they spend it on the one you saw, the market, the man with the eggs, then of course the man will get his money. But you see, he's even making them. He won't get that money because he will be pushed to produce more. The prices will start going up. He can't get that price. But as there's a rush because people have more money, that will encourage him to produce more eggs. And at the end of the day, he'll be better off.
Prof, I like that you talked about production because I want to ask you now about the manufacturing sector. You said earlier that, the labor really should produce more. What do you think that the impact of this high minimum wage will be on, inflation and operational costs, especially in the manufacturing sector?
Again, if it's just because the industries will have to look at their wage structure, but the productivity of factors, they will have to look into that. See, there's no way labor can get quadruple the wage rate without burdening about increase in productivity. I don't see how we can survive on that. And then you ask yourself, is it the job of labor to increase productivity if the industry themselves are not providing requisite complementary factors to increase their productivity. Nobody is saying that Nigerian labor is lazy. No, we're not making that point. What are saying their productivity vis-a-vis comparator, countries is lower. And that for quite a few industries, if they do an objective analysis, especially for those who are automating, for those who are now getting more, the relative share of labor is declining in those industries. The relative weight of labor is declining. And each time we make this point about weak institutions, weak governance institutions, weak policy implementation, let's understand that we're also saying that the factors in those processes, it's not just the ministers, it's the whole productivity of that sector. If we can make the civil service more effective, more productive, more proactive, more having the capacity to impact on development and growth, then we can justify even a 500% increase in wages. Again, let me be very careful making that statement. I'm assuming that the base is a living wage. I'm assuming that there's a consensus of all of us who sit around the table and say, what is the living wage? Do we have to index, at least, even if not 100%, index the wage structure in Nigeria to inflation to a certain extent that will ensure a living wage for the vast majority of Nigerians? Once we sort that problem, then this whole issue of cascading the highest income down to our own minimum wage, living wage, not this time not minimum wage anymore, but the living wage, then becomes an issue of negotiations. How do we negotiate it? But the point I'm making though is that labor must be productive,
right?
If we are to grow our economy. And we've already discussed it, before this. So that the productivity means that you must educate your population. You can't have 20, 30, 40, in some states, 50, 60% children out of school. They're out of school now. They'll be out of school in 10 years. How do you cater for that population? How do you create a workforce that is productive, a workforce that will contribute, a workforce that will not just contribute to the total, but contribute to the line of the industry they find themselves in? How do you create the capacity for them to go into an industry, sustain an industry, and earn a wage that reflects that capacity?
Right.
When your population is uneducated, not motivated, just running around the street, being out of school, and getting to a point where they are not even in the formal wage thing, but they are waiting for the minimum wage to be increased and declared, and then everybody, believe you me, after the mechanic who is repairing your car is going to charge you 5 times
more
because he wants his own minimum wage. It doesn't mean that his productivity.
So, Prof, I'm happy, and let me interject here to say that, I'll just read something from social media, which was a question that someone asked. We tried to socialize this topic on social media to see how our audience is thinking, and it's, should the conversation be more about reducing the cost of living, of the cost of goods and services, which is, the average cost of living, or increasing the minimum wage?
It's like an philosophical or ideological question.
Okay.
Right now we run a market economy. We run a neoliberal capitalist economy. That's what we run. And it has its own principles.
Don't tell me the prices are not coming down.
They don't come down. I won't say it loud, but I can whisper it to you. See, if those markets equilibrate at higher prices, they will remain there. If the long-term or even medium-term equilibrium for those markets, based on the structural shifts, based on the decline in labor productivity, it will remain there. So, to answer that question, And I alluded to it before. If government, for example, says education is free, healthcare, you'll be removing that from what? Your cost of living. Because, of course, you don't have to go to the hospital to spend money. If you want to travel from point B within city, you just started metro here. And I think for a period, people can ride free. Let's assume that they just say it remains like that. You socialize those services. The minute you socialize those services, you remove them from the cost of living basket because you no longer pay for them. So that's one way of doing it. It's saying, okay, these things are increasing in price. We'll collectively produce them. Health, we say, certain types of health issues will go to any hospital and you have it through. No, but you see, that is not the philosophy of what you are running now. We're running a market base. Everything is, goes to the market and you pay the market price. So you really, there's a limit to which if you must then pay the market price, then you should be paid a market price that will cover all those things. I think that's the logic. And I see Labour insisting on that. And I agree with them.
Prof, we've been here before. I'm sure you know the history even better than myself, I guess. I feel like we're caught in a cycle of wage increases that's followed by cost increases, by wage increases, by cost increases. And here I would call for you to sort of put on that hat of, being a special advisor to the presidency. What would you say that the government can do in the short, medium term to address hyperinflation and reduce the living costs? Because, increasing the minimum wage, just like you rightly said, would come with, a proportional increase in the costs of goods and services. So what is the way out? What can the government do to tackle hyperinflation?
To the extent that they still insist on this neoliberal policy orientation, there's really very little they can do. The markets will rule. The government can't rule. That's the logic of what they've decided
So
to
are
do.
you saying the people this message should be directed to the people? Is this a social behavioral change that needs to happen in terms of how the market is responding? So to the guy who says he would start charging 10,000 naira for a crate of eggs.
I didn't read that. I know the media, I know this. Believe me, I just pity that guy. Because you know what? People will stop eating eggs.
I see that happening already, Prof. I watched the video.
So let him say 100. People will just laugh at him and say, because each time there's a key parameter we normally look at. Once we leave the aggregate, we say we're now looking at the relative prices.
Right.
And we used to say relative prices, but what we have noticed in poverty is that people from the middle class, because they are changing their preferences based on changes in relative price, are now going down to markets that previously the poor will dominate.
I agree.
People don't eat gari. The guy comes out from work. How can you give me? But today they are drinking gari. Believe you me.
It's happening already, Prof.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, on TikTok, there's a video that's trending now, and people make their stew out of blended cucumbers as opposed to tomatoes because the price of tomatoes has gone up.
So we look at the relative prices. But you raised the point before that I thought I would go at this whole psychological, philosophical, people's mindset.
How do we change
it?
The mindset.
Because I don't understand why prices of everything is gone up. And you call a young student and you ask her you want to see the shopping list. And you'll be surprised the items that she's not going to touch. As far as you are concerned, those are not basic needs items. For her, there's a mindset that actually, violates some of the things some of the behavior we just postulate. The preference for certain items, and for me, I'm just going to categorize them. For me, it's saying imports and exports. You discover that our imports, although I was looking at the trade statistics just a few days ago, and I'm told that if that thing is correct, that for the last quarter, we had a trade balance, a surplus.
Oh, did we?
I thought I read it in one of the social media, and I paused a bit. I said, "Oh, well, that's interesting. If we have stopped importing virtually everything, you know." But if people begin to do the substitute, if the relative prices change and people start going for items that used to be preserved for poor people, those prices are going to jack up. And the poor people who are paying 1 naira for a cup of, or let's say 10 naira for a cup of gari, now discover that cup of gari is gone up to what? 100, 200? And they are going to say, wait a minute, what is going on? But they are already poor. They are just barely surviving. So what they are going to do, because people are shifting in the markets, those people are literally being asked to just don't exist anymore. Just go and starve.
Prof, now I feel like we're back to where we began, which is at the point where the challenges exist. You talked about the Labour Congress and, the Labour in general needing to produce more. You talked about manufacturing. We've talked about social behavioral change and how people need to think better in order to respond better. Because like the young guy, I'm talking about the egg and other Nigerians that rush to take all these actions, who are even out on the informal sector, not even in the formal sector, and that's impacting us and putting us in the same place where we started. And, the government is, putting together all these strategies to bring us out of the challenge. What would you say is your advice to the Nigerian Labour Congress to advocate, or to help elevate the cost of living for Nigerians? What's the solution? Because I don't want us to just stay with the challenges. What's the way out?
One step that we noticed in the last political dispensation is that Labour decided that they are no longer going to sit on the fence. They are going to challenge the whole policy-making process and actually try to be responsible for policy-making in Nigeria. Although, looking at their manifesto, it wasn't really that different from the other mainstream political parties. But since these issues are honestly political, all of us have been shying away from it. We don't want to say we're back to politics. No, but the group in government defines the social preference. And that's what the whole political democratic system is supposed to be, that a group of people working in concert will ask you to put them in power, and they will define what the policies are. Turn the other way, they will say, no, during the election, we'll tell you what our policies are. We'll tell you what we're going to do. And then you vote for us. If you vote for us, you're voting for those policies. Look, if you ask my honest opinion, I think we have to rethink our economic policies. We have to rethink the orientation. We have to rethink the ideology. And if you push the same thing you have been doing for the past 20 years or even 30 years, if you are going to keep on pushing that idea, you are going to end up. This is post Babangida era. We are still stuck in that thing now. Privatization, liberalization. Again, I have to be careful here. I'm a mainstream economics, although I don't believe in some of the excesses of my discipline. But if we are going to run that, and we don't have the discipline to run it, then we are going to remain where we are. And the discipline means that you want to run an efficient and a productive system. Inflation responds to the supply side only. It's not just the demand side. And when you can't produce, when you can't put the infrastructure on the ground, when you have a disarticulated economic base, when you have a corrupt institutional architecture, how will you organize an economy, a society that will not continue to allow cost of living to rise, allow living wages to just keep on escalating while the majority of your people don't even have access to that wage. You have to re-engineer the system as a whole. You have to sit down, and you need honest and disciplined people, not just to govern, but to manage. We always criticize the leaders, but the managers, we often ignore the managers. Our institutions are weak. Our behavior is tainted. I think you've raised that issue over and over again. What's our mindset? We have 130 million people in poverty. What is the psychology of those people? How are they motivated to even produce? We have crime increasing because people have just decided it's easy to be a Yahoo boy now. It's easy to get into kidnapping. It's easy to get this wealth. We're tired. We don't even have the skills. We don't have the motivation to do honest and sincere work. You can increase the wages as much as you like. As long as you don't produce, those markets will not clear. And the prices will get stuck at that level. You keep on importing. The foreign exchange it's gone, you are struggling to see how you redeem it. No, it will keep on going down, and the more you consume imports without producing, you are still going to put pressure on that market. And your inflation, imported inflation, will even worsen the cost push inflation that you have by, having your wages, just going up, and labor will give them 300, 400% and give them 1 month. Sorry, not 1 month, give them a year. They'll come back and say, wow, that money is gone. Because with this 450,000 we are giving a laborer, we discovered that a laborer cannot even go home with 450,000.
Oh, well, we are now past our time. Thank you so much, Professor Kwanashie. Prof is a distinguished figure in the field of economics and a professor at Veritas University, former vice chancellor at the institution. It's such an honor to share time and space with you today on our podcast. I really appreciate how thorough you were about explaining these concepts with us and preferring solutions. For just a passing question, what advice do you have for the various stakeholder groups? One sentence advice. What's your advice for the government? What's your advice for the Nigerian citizens? What's your advice for the managers? What's your advice for the various stakeholder groups?
The destiny of our country is not in the hands of labor or in the hands of government. It's in the hands of all of us. We all have to be invited to the table, and we should actually all bear our minds as to how we move this country forward. Returns to factors, returns to the political class. We have to sort out all this, how we distribute these resources. It's actually not a labor. What is the population of the labor group? There are more Nigerians that are out of labor. You mentioned the rural population. Who talks about what is their returns from the economy? No. I think we should solve this in a simultaneous way. Everybody should sit around the table. And labor should know that they can't get 500%, while the man in the village is getting no percent. We have to strike a balance. And I think it's everybody's interest to sit around and make sure that there's a fair wage in this country. And let's all agree what that fair wage is. Let's agree whether we don't have to reduce the cost of living, not through wages, direct payment, but indirect payments. Let's at least agree on those general principles. And let's say, listen, we are going to revive rural health. We are going to revive rural roads. And genuinely now, not just announcing programs that eventually the political class just squander, constituency project is given and nobody sees the constituency. No, it's not that. It's actually being honest to our nation. And all of us sitting down and saying, look, this is the way. Don't tell me it's neoliberal that you can't plan. No, don't plan. Because if you start doing that, you're interfering with the market. But the market has failed us. The market has failed us in many instances. And we cannot just keep on saying that markets must clear. The markets don't clear. And you can have persistent increase in wages because of distortions. Not just in mentality, consumption mentality, but also in structure of production. Let's all come together, sit on a table, everybody, not just labor and government. And people should be able to tell government, see, the way you're distributing these resources, class-wise, is unjust. You cannot have 10% of Nigerians, cornering for themselves 90% of resources and allowing 90% of Nigerians to go hungry and dying on the streets. You can't do that. And tell me it is market? No.
Wow. Thank you so much, Professor Mike Kwanashie. We have come to the end of this episode. We hope that our listeners, viewers, find this insightful. Until next time, this is the Economic Jigsaw. All the best. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.